Mara Ellison had been waiting tables at Rosie's Diner for 3 years. It was not the life she had planned for herself, but it was steady, and steady was what she needed. The diner sat on a quiet corner, where the city's bright lights faded into shadow, a place regulars loved for its cheap coffee, and the way nobody asked too many questions. Mara liked it that way. She had enough questions of her own that she didn't want answered. Her younger brother, Danny, was the reason. 2 years ago he had started running with people Mara didn't know, and didn't want to know. He would vanish for days, then show up at her apartment with cash he never explained, and a look in his eyes that made her stomach twist. She loved him too much to turn him away, and she was too afraid to ask what he had gotten himself into. So she poured coffee, cleared tables, and told herself that someday he would walk away from whatever it was, and everything would go back to normal. It was a rainy Tuesday night when the man in the black coat first walked into the diner. He moved like someone used to being noticed, though he did nothing to draw attention. He chose the corner booth, the one with the best view of the door, and ordered black coffee. When Mara brought the check, he left a $100 bill for a $5 tab and told her to keep the change. She thought it was a one-time thing, a stranger passing through with more money than sense. But he came back the next night, and the one after that. He always sat in the same booth. He always ordered the same coffee. And every time, he watched the door like he was waiting for someone, though no one ever came looking for him. His name, she would later learn, was Vincent Cole. But for those first 2 weeks, he was simply the quiet man in the corner booth who left generous tips and asked polite questions about her day. He wanted to know if she liked working nights, if she had family in the city, if she had ever wanted to do something other than wait tables. His questions were careful, never pushing too hard, but they lingered in a way that made her feel like he was truly listening. Mara found herself looking forward to his visits more than she wanted to admit. There was something calm about him, something steady, in a life that otherwise felt like it was always one bad phone call away from falling apart. He never raised his voice. He never made her uncomfortable. He simply sat, drank his coffee, and watched the door. She did not know, of course, that he was watching for her brother. The night everything changed was a Thursday, 3 weeks after Vincent's first visit. Danny burst through the diner door just after closing, his jacket soaked with rain, his face pale and drawn. He grabbed Mara's arm before she could say a word. "I need you to hide me," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, Mara, just for tonight." Before she could ask what was wrong, the door opened again. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room until they landed on Danny. Mara's heart dropped into her stomach. She did not know what her brother had done, but she knew, in that instant, that it was bad. Then Vincent stood up from his booth. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked toward the 2 men and said a few quiet words Mara could not hear. Whatever he said was enough. The men glanced at each other, nodded, and stepped back outside to wait. Mara stared at him, her mind racing to catch up with what she had just seen. The stranger who had been coming to her diner for weeks, who asked about her day and left generous tips, was not just a customer. He was the reason those men had walked in. He was the reason her brother was shaking with fear. Vincent turned to her, his expression unreadable. "We should talk," he said, "all 3 of us." They sat in the corner booth, the same one Vincent always chose, and for the first time, Mara understood why he liked it. From that seat, he could see everything. Vincent explained the truth plainly, without cruelty, but without softening it either. Danny had taken something that belonged to him, something valuable enough that other, less patient people wanted Danny gone for good. Vincent had not been coming to the diner by accident. He had been trying to understand the sister of the young man who owed him everything, trying to decide if she was someone he could trust, to help make this right, before it became something none of them could undo. Mara felt her whole understanding of the past few weeks crumble and rebuild itself in an instant. Every quiet conversation, every question about her life, had been part of something larger. She should have felt betrayed. Instead, strangely, she felt something closer to relief. At least now she understood. Danny wanted to run. He said it over and over, his hands shaking as he spoke, but Vincent shook his head slowly. "Running will get you killed faster than staying," he said. There are people looking for you who will not offer you a conversation like this one. I am the reason you are not dead already." Mara looked at her brother, then at the man across from her, and made a decision that would change the course of her life. She asked Vincent what it would take to fix this. Over the following days, Mara found herself pulled into a world she had spent years trying to keep Danny away from. She met Vincent in quiet corners of the city, in empty parking lots after her shifts ended, in the back room of a bakery that never seemed to have customers. Each time, they talked about Danny, about what he had taken, about how to return it and repair the damage before it became irreversible. But their conversations began to drift beyond her brother's troubles. Vincent told her about his father, a man who had built a life out of fear and control, and how Vincent had spent years trying to run a version of that life with more restraint, more honor, though he knew the world he lived in would never be truly honorable. He told her he had not chosen this life so much as inherited it, the way some people inherit a family business they never wanted, but cannot walk away from. Mara found herself telling him things too, about their parents, who had died when she and Danny were young, about how she had spent her whole life trying to hold together a family that kept slipping through her fingers, about how tired she was of being the only one who seemed to care whether Danny lived or died. Vincent listened the way he always had, carefully, without judgment. And somewhere in those quiet conversations, in parking lots and back rooms, Mara began to see the man behind the reputation. He was still someone who lived by rules she did not fully understand, someone whose world was built on power and consequence. But he was also someone who kept his word, who treated her with a gentleness she had not expected, who seemed, against all reason, to actually care what happened to her and to the brother who had wronged him. The tension broke on a cold Sunday night. Danny, terrified and impatient, decided he could not wait for Vincent's plan to unfold. He tried to run, taking what little money he had and slipping out of the city before anyone could stop him. But the people hunting him were faster and far less forgiving than Vincent had been. They found him within hours, cornering him in an alley 2 blocks from the bus station. Mara got the call from Vincent just after midnight. His voice, usually so calm, carried an urgency she had never heard from him before. He told her where to meet him and to trust him, even if what happened next did not make sense at first. She arrived to find Vincent already there, standing between her brother and 3 men who worked for a rival crew, men who answered to no one but themselves, and who had no interest in the careful rules Vincent lived by. Mara's heart pounded as she watched him negotiate, his voice low and steady, even as the situation threatened to spiral into something neither of them could control. He broke his own rules that night. He offered concessions he had never intended to offer, put his own reputation and standing on the line, all to keep Danny alive, and to keep the promise he had made to Mara days earlier. Stood frozen at the edge of the alley, watching the man from the corner booth risk everything he had built for a family that was not his own. It ended, finally, with an agreement. Danny would return what he had taken. He would leave the city and never come back, a small price for the chance to keep his life. The rival crew grumbled, but accepted the terms Vincent laid out, terms that cost him more than Mara would fully understand until much later. When the alley emptied, and it was just the 3 of them, Danny turned to Vincent with tears in his eyes, stammering out apologies that felt too small for what had almost happened. Vincent simply nodded, told him to be smarter from now on, and turned to walk away. Mara caught his arm before he could leave. "Why did you do all this?" she asked. "You didn't owe him anything. You didn't owe me anything." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, the rain starting to fall softly around them. "I told myself it was business," he finally said. "That keeping your brother alive was worth more to me than punishing him would have been." But that was never the whole truth. He did not explain further, and Mara did not push him to. She understood, in the quiet way people sometimes understand things without needing them spoken aloud, that the weeks of coffee and conversation in that corner booth had meant something to him too. In the days that followed, Danny packed his few belongings and left the city, promising to call, promising to be better, promising all the things people promise, when they have been given a second chance they know they do not deserve. Mara believed him, mostly. She had learned, over the years, to hope for the best, while bracing for less. She stayed at Rosie's diner. It was still the same rundown building on the same quiet corner, still full of regulars who loved cheap coffee and never asked too many questions. But something had shifted. The corner booth was no longer just a table by the door. It had become the place where her life had changed, quietly and completely, without her ever choosing it. Vincent still came by, though less often than before, and always a little later in the evening, when the diner had mostly emptied out. He never made a show of it. He simply sat in his booth, ordered his coffee, and waited for her to bring it over. Sometimes they talked for a few minutes. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people have been through something together that neither of them will ever fully explain to anyone else. Mara knew what he was, knew the world he lived in, and the things it likely required of him. She was not naive about it, and there were nights she lay awake, wondering what she was doing, letting a man like that into her life at all. But she also knew what she had seen in that alley, the risk he had taken for a family that owed him nothing but trouble. She knew the man who listened to her stories about her parents with real patience, who remembered small details about her life that most people would have forgotten. The line between stranger and something more had blurred slowly, cup of coffee by cup of coffee, conversation by conversation, until one day, Mara realized it had disappeared completely. He was no longer the man everyone in the neighborhood whispered about with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He was simply Vincent, the man who sat in the corner booth, who watched the door out of habit, and who, against every reasonable expectation, had become the person she trusted most in a life that had taught her trust rarely came without a price. She never found out exactly why he had chosen her diner that first rainy Tuesday, whether it truly had been about her brother from the very beginning, or whether some smaller, quieter reason had drawn him in as well. She stopped asking. Some answers, she had learned, mattered less than the truth she could see for herself, sitting across the table from her night after night, steady and certain in a world that rarely offered either. And so life at Rosie's diner went on, the same rhythm of orders and refills and quiet evenings. Except now there was a corner booth that held a story only Mara truly understood. A story that began with a cup of coffee served to a stranger and became something far larger than either of them had expected, tangled up in fear and family, and a kind of loyalty that neither danger nor distance could fully undo.